So internationally, at least from an American perspective, like Ruto should just stay where he is. He's not going to be able to make any moves because of what's currently happening back home.
I think that the United States has a history of shying away from situations when there is not some sort of domestic solvency. Like you have to have the ability to prove that whatever is being negotiated is going to actually, like, you're going to be able to follow through.
It's a good faith,
and deal. However, it's always going to be about the U.S. interest first.
Correct.
And so the U.S. interests are going to pivot based off of what's going on in the world at that time. And if it is not strategic and or beneficial to uphold some of these statements that are made, then it might not come. And there is some nuance there, and this is one of the reasons why I think it was very important for Ruto to continue doing his world tour that he was doing. And so now that has been halted with the demonstrations that are happening in Kenya, there is a huge dent on what he was trying to develop as a diplomatic process.
Moving on to a post-Biden presidency. Prior to all the chaos and protesting that's ongoing in Kenya right now, President Ruto was invited on a rare state visit to Joe Biden's White House. That was back in May. Now, we saw a raft of deals between Kenya and the U.S. signed in sectors including healthcare, climate change, trade and investment, and also debt sustainability. Now, more controversially, there were agreements on military partnerships to bring peace and security to Haiti and other counterterrorism operations. I think one of the operations that Kenya is already effective on right now is being able to try Houthi rebels if they're caught on the Red Sea. That's something that was in progress. And then Kenya was also granted the status of a non-NATO ally. Then the U.S. government was also to provide very controversially, financial and technical assistance to Kenya's Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, a body that is currently not constituted, but the U.S. is already ready with money. Now, Annette, not to rope you in Kenyan politics, because I know you've been so engrossed with what's happening here, but what happens to such deals during transitions? These gentlemen agreements between the U.S. and foreign governments, Biden and Ruto, that do not necessarily have the force of law. It's not a treaty. It's not something legal. It's just a gentleman's agreement and some documents signed. What typically happens to them during transitions? Let's say, on one hand, maybe if Kamala wins, or if on the other hand, if Trump wins, what is likely to happen to some of these Ruto-Biden deals, Annette?
We've already seen what happened. So when Obama was in office, he had agreements with certain countries. And just to kind of echo what you were saying, is this is not an official treaty. An official treaty would require Congress to agree on it. So the Senate would have to have, I think, 2/3 to agree for it. And then if not that, then, the process would continue however it continues. And so typically, that's not how things goes, because it's really tough to do that. But when it comes to being the president, you do have some latitude as far as like executive decisions that you can make. And so Ruto was definitely counting on a second Biden term.
Yeah.
And so that and I don't think that was a bad thing. I think that you should also look and see what happens if this doesn't continue, because here's the thing. Boots are on the ground in Haiti, okay? If Trump wins, and this is, if you are the president of Kenya, if Trump wins, then what happens? And is there a guarantee for the safety of your citizens should they need to evacuate? Because that's a hemispheric issue right there. Like that's one of the reasons why I didn't find that to be a wise choice, in addition to the fact that I don't think we have any business there. So basically, if the candidate goes,
all those deals
are left in the air. You're leaving it to chance. You are hoping now that somebody else who's a totally different person and will have a different agenda or different priorities, even if that's part of their agenda, you're hoping that they're going to prioritize you And that's just not a realistic.
And you know, the
thing to
interesting
do.
thing is that before Biden, when Trump was still president, there was a trade agreement, a permanent trade deal that was being negotiated between Kenya and the U.S. under Uhuru's presidency. But guess what Biden did when he came in? That was put on ice. You know, like the trade agreement, it's still there. The negotiations are still apparently going on, but there's been no movement. You know, some people thought that during this state visit is when it's gonna be signed, but that was a Trump deal, and that was gonna be a permanent trade agreement. The only other country that has a permanent, the only other African country that has a permanent trade agreement with the U.S. is Morocco. You know, and Morocco is special to the U.S. because Morocco is one of the first countries to recognize the U.S. During American independence. You know, like the King of Morocco. Yeah, you know, it was one of the first countries to recognize the sovereignty of the U.S. So we've already been able to see what happens during transitions. But I think with this one was different because it was a state visit, and state visits are very rare. You know, these are not things that just happen, you know, like willy-nilly. The last time an African was hosted to a state visit, I think, was Ellen Sirleaf Johnson. And that was, I can't remember what year, but it was maybe 15, 16, 17 years ago.
So the Biden administration clearly had some interest in pivoting had some interest in Africa in general. They held the summit that happened in December. And so that's when, you know, most, not all, but most of the African countries were invited to come and sent delegations. And so that's not something that has happened. I think it was the last time something like that had happened, it was like 12 or so. It was more than a decade.
During Obama's time.
Yeah. So so you know, that was that's actually a big deal, you know, to have all of them come and invite them. And then, yes, to bring now for a state visit for that to happen again, that is also a big deal. However, it's always going to be about the U.S. interest first.
Correct.
You know, and so the U.S. interests are going to pivot based off of what's going on in the world at that time. And if it is not strategic and or beneficial to uphold some of these statements that are made, then it might not come. And there is some nuance there, and this is one of the reasons why I think it was very important for Ruto to continue doing his world tour that he was doing. And so now that has been halted with the demonstrations that are happening in Kenya, there is a huge dent on what he was trying to develop as a diplomatic prowess. And so now that it has been halted, it's going to prevent him from, I'm not sure what the agenda was, right? So it wasn't all vacations, right? There were some moves that he was trying to make
strategic
on
moves,
on a global scale. And so the fact that he has to be grounded at this point in time is really putting a damper on his ability to actually even offer anything on the international stage. So even if Biden were to continue, until this situation is handled, however that happens, it's going to be very difficult for Kenya to try and ask any favors right now.
So internationally, at least from an American perspective, you know, like Ruto should just stay where he is. He's not going to be able to make any moves because of what's currently happening back home.
I think that the United States has a history of shying away from situations when there is not some sort of domestic solvency. Like you have to have the ability to prove that whatever is being negotiated is going to actually, like, you're going to be able to follow through. It's a good faith. You know, and so if you're not able to follow through, then there's no point for the U.S. to get involved.
And the